Exhausted and sorely out of breath, Oliver slowly limped into the little town of Barnet. He had no heart to beg, and there he sat. Just then, he noticed a young boy surveying him most earnestly from the other side of the road. "Hello, me old mate. What's the curry?" he shouted in a cheery manner. "Please," said Oliver, "I've been walking for 7 days without food or shelter, and I'm so very hungry, so very tired and lonely." "Well, strike me pink," said the boy. "If you want grub, you shall have it. Walk this way, me old mucker, and I'll take you to Mr. Fagin's gaff. He's uncommonly generous." Oliver discovered that his new friend's name was Mr. Jack Dawkins, and that most of his mates referred to him as the Artful Dodger. When Oliver inquired as to how the Dodger had come by such a name, he would only reply, "Come along to Fagin's, me old Sam, and you'll find out." I always loved the story of Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist was always one of my favorite tales. And the reason why is there's so much symbolism that really gets thrown into that story. There's symbolism about obesity, about, differentiations and poverty levels, and it really, splits among those who are poor and sort of, I guess attacking themselves and the difference between the rich and the poor. And there's all these different, great themes out there. But to me, the overarching concept, I guess, of Oliver Twist dealt with this idea of a boy finding a home. Initially, Oliver Twist starts out as this kid who's an orphan in a workhouse. And then, eventually, I guess really just kind of an orphan who's there, but, essentially asks for more food. And the result is that he's thrown to the undertaker's workhouse, the whole 9 yards, makes his way to London. After meeting the Dodger, he becomes a pickpocket. He becomes a prodigy of, or really, I guess, a student of Fagin. And then eventually he's caught up in everything about Bill Sikes. And all that basically ends with him being adopted by Mr. Brownlow. The whole gist of this, it really kind of looking at it from my perspective, from I guess, kind of taking my own experiences and throwing it in there, is that Oliver Twist is very much a coming of age story. And while our stories aren't necessarily as extreme as Oliver Twist, in the sense that we're not in a situation where we're orphans and then eventually find our home, it's about finding something, that one thing, that one particular thing that means all the world to us. It's the only thing Oliver Twist ever wanted. Oliver Twist wanted a home, and eventually he found one. For some people, it's a relationship, or for some people, it's a job of status. For others, it's, physically or externally important things. For different people, it's different things. For me, it was finding a sense of self. I want to pick up from the last video that we had, where we talked about the 3 life lessons of Rob, the 3 very important experiences that I had that taught me the value of integrity and honesty. But to know the value of integrity and honesty is not the same as implementing the value of integrity and honesty. It's not the same as implementing those 2 things. With myself being at this fork in the road, at this being in this sort of precipice where I had to figure out what I wanted to do, I was faced with this absolute truth. As cliche as it sounds, I was faced with the fact that a time would come when I would die. And it was I guess really a concept, an idea that I'd never really thought about before. I'd never really given a whole lot of thought to the fact that I'll move on from this world to whatever it is that comes next, whatever it is that happens to come after this, whether it's just worm food or whether it's some sort of afterlife, or whatever the case is. A time will come when I will move on to that. And when I'm on my deathbed, when I'm in those twilight moments of my life and I'm looking back at everything that I'd ever achieved, did I really want to look back at a life where I seemed miserable, where I was angry and bitter and upset and struggling day in and day out? Or did I want to look back on a life where I had a huge family and I had friends and I had this life that by my personal definition was one worth living? Faced with this truth, I was in a position to where YouTube was beginning to take off. Comics Explained was no longer a channel where I just talked about comics. It wasn't necessarily huge, but it certainly was at a point where I was making equivalent to what I made at my job. And so I quit. And it was the most terrifying thing that I ever did. Quitting that job was one of the most terrifying experiences that I'd ever had. Because in reality, that job wasn't the worst thing ever. I mean, there were aspects of it that were mundane. I've never been a person who's been good at sitting in a place, looking at a computer screen and just crunching numbers. For me, the learning process has to be one that's more, I guess, involved. That has to be more hands-on is the best way to put it. I learn best when I'm doing things, when I'm thinking and physically doing at the same time. And so because of that, when I look back on my former supervisor, who's a buddy of mine, I look back on former coworkers who were friends of mine, in reality, I always feel like I made the right call, because what I ended up doing was I got to work. The night that I put in my notice, I got to work. I was working third shift that night, I'll never forget. And I was there for about half an hour. And I fired up, I had my email fired up, and I fired up an actual email to send off to my supervisor, my direct supervisor. And it was like December 31st of whatever year it was that I sent it will be my last day. That was a month and a half out. I gave them all kinds of notice, because my thought was, if YouTube went belly up, I wanted to leave on good terms. I didn't want to, you guys are this and this and that and that. I didn't want to act like a little kid. And so I remember sitting with that email, sitting in front of my face for what felt like the whole night, for about 7.5 hours. As a young person, my parents always taught me that stability is the most important thing. That if at all possible, always ensure financial, emotional, mental stability. Always make sure that you're in a position to where you're satisfied with where you are. That's not the same as being comfortable, but be satisfied with where you are. Look out for something better, but be in a position to where if nothing better comes along, you're not wishing on a hope. And so because I was basically leaving stability behind, what this meant is that I was leaving a full-time job with benefits, with retirement and health insurance and dental and eye and all that kind of stuff. And I was moving into uncharted waters. I was basically a contractor. That I was moving in a position where my own healthcare would have to be paid for, my own dental and eye would have to be paid for. I'd have to make sure all my taxes are sorted out. That my financial future would live and die by my ability to be a responsible, functional human being. And so I hit send. At the end of that night, it was probably half an hour before I was supposed to go, and I hit send. And I was freaked out. I was like, and my boss didn't say anything. I mean, it was days, maybe a week, 2 weeks before he said anything. And then eventually he kind of piped up and he's like, so you're wanting to leave? And I was like, yeah, it's not really you. It's just I'm ready to move on to something else. And so eventually we get to my exit interview, and I was sitting in there, and I kept thinking about all the times, all the mistakes I'd made on that job, but how much I'd grown on that job, how much stronger of a person I'd become while I was at that job. Now, in truth, the growth I experienced at that job was nothing in comparison to the growth that I would experience running my own business and everything after the death of my parents. But the fact remains, at the time, I was ready to move on. Leaving that job, going out, becoming self-employed, becoming someone that brought in other contractors and so on and so forth, it forces you in a position to where you have to see yourself in a different light. The reality is that I always struggled with confidence back then. I always struggled with a self-image issue. I always struggled with the question of, am I worth a damn? If I'm really putting, cards on the table, if I'm really putting my cards on the table, that's what it really came down to. By running my own business, by bringing people on as contractors, by meeting and, going into business meetings, flying to other cities and even, really especially running into other fans who would routinely tell me, I love what you do and you've changed my life and you got me back into comics and these different things like that. Experiencing all those different scenarios, it changes you in a way that you really couldn't even begin to imagine. And the reason why was because I was on my own 2 feet. There was no support system. It was just me. It was sink or swim, succeed or fail, and that was it. It was a pass or fail class. That's what this was. I had enrolled in this pass-fail class of life, and I was passing with flying colors. Because as I was going through this, I suddenly started to realize, like, yeah, man, I got this shit. Like, I'm a responsible, functional human being. I can budget my money. I've got a strong character. There are times when I question what it is that I'm doing, and there are times when I'm not sure whether or not I've really got what it takes to keep on keeping on. But the fact that I keep enduring through all this, the fact that I keep pushing forward, the fact that I don't just kind of give up, acquiesce, and walk away, that's a character-defining moment. For people out there, not everyone needs the same thing I need, right? Like you don't necessarily need to work a job that you don't like and then lose your parents and then you go and launch your own business. For other people, it's just understanding who you are. You have to do what I did. You have to find an answer to the question, who the hell are you? What are you about? One of the funny things is that over the course of my 20s, even though I really had no business pursuing any real measure of a relationship, I always wanted to date. Over the course of my 20s, I always wanted to have like a tried and true significant relationship. And I had a few fly-by-night girlfriends, but it was never anything of any real significance. In hindsight, had I dated back then, it would have been disastrous. One, because of the shifts that I was working, and two, because of where I was at mentally and emotionally. I was nowhere near in a position to where I was happy with myself. And that's one of the big rules that I've learned. In order to be a great man or a great woman, to a great man or a great woman, you have to be be a great man or a great woman. You have to start with yourself. And so for me, in this boat that I was in, I wasn't in a position to really find happiness with anyone. And when I sat back, when I kind of, took a breath and looked around and I just kind of analyzed the situation that I was in, the idea was I need to work on me. I need to figure out who I'm about. I need to answer the question, who the hell is Rob Jefferson? What does Rob Jefferson believe? What's his moral philosophies? What's his perception of life? What are his actual views? Where is the line in the sand that I won't cross? And once I was able to find those places, once I was able to create these kind of boundaries for myself, instead of feeling like I was free floating, it was a whole new world. Because now I was more confident. I was more sure of myself because I knew what I was about. I wasn't just kind of out there adopting the personality traits and the views of people that I happened to come across that I really, really liked. Instead, it was like, hey man, this is kind of how this game gets played. And you can be a part of this journey that I'm on, or you can get left behind. But that's just the way it is. Sorry about your luck. But as a friend of mine, Gary, said, I'm not going to put my life on hold in order to make somebody else happy. It's not going to happen. I did that long enough. At this point, it's my time now to find my happiness. Now, granted, I also kind of began to sort of curve that back a little bit because when you're walking this road of saying, the only thing that matters to me is my happiness, it's very easy to become a narcissist. It's very easy to fall down into that road of saying, the world be damned, I'm gonna go be happy because everywhere I go, there I am, and I'm the only person I can ever rely on, and I'm the most important person in the world. That's not necessarily true. To me, it was finding this happy middle ground. Finding this perception of where I was and how I view the world and how I saw things and what I was looking for. And that's why I say I always likened that to Oliver Twist, because it's the story of self-discovery and it's a story of external discovery. It's the story of Oliver Twist going through all these terrible situations and all these horrible scenarios, only to basically find a much better understanding of who he's about, where he comes from, what his story is, and then eventually find success. For everybody else out there, I feel like it's the same way. Now, for some people, I know it seems like there's no light at the end of that tunnel, right? Like you're stumbling down this tunnel of self-discovery and it seems like you're gonna be stumbling down that road forever. It may be you're on that road for a long time, but I am here to tell you, as a guy who's been through shit, and when I say shit, I mean shit. As a guy who's been through some really, really bad crap, I can tell you, there's light at the end of that tunnel. Right now, like you're chest high in crap, or you're neck high in crap, and it feels like you're gonna be forever. But the longer you keep walking, the more shallow those waters are going to get. And as you continue going, you'll eventually reach to the point where this ocean of shit is down to your shoulders, and it's down to your chest, and it's down to your waist, and then your thighs, and your knees, and your ankles, and then it's just basically little splatters of water, and then there's nothing there, and you're at the end of the tunnel. And what will come out that other end, how you will be when you get to the other side, you won't even recognize yourself. You'll sit down one day and you'll look around and you'll just be like, my God, look, it's awesome how far I've come. That's the whole perception you will take because it's true. It'll be absolutely true. It'll be awesome how far you've come, how much you've grown, the kind of person that you'll turn into over the course of your life, because you will have been a person who's been through the ringer and you'll be stronger for the victory. Because over these terrible experiences, you'll get a much better understanding of who you are and what you're about, what you believe, what you don't believe, what you consider to be right and wrong, even if there's no absolute rules there. You'll come to a point where you'll say, the world says this is right, but I don't think so. And you'll stand in the face of the world and say, I can give a shit what you think is right or wrong. Here's my stance on things. I mean, you'll get to this point where you'll gain a much, much better understanding of a sense of self. Now, of course, this message is really delivered more towards people who are in a position to where they feel like they're free floating, where they feel like they have no direction. They feel like they're just kind of a person that's existing and not really living. This is really geared more towards those folks. If you're a person that's already on this journey, keep on keeping on. I've been there, so I know exactly where it is that you're coming from. But for those of you guys who are hesitant, those of you guys who are scared of taking that first step, who are terrified because you're walking into the abyss, I promise you, it's not as bad as you think it is. And you have so much more to gain by walking through that tunnel, that world of hurt, than you do staying where you are. It's like for example, you could, if you're in a position right now and you're like, I know, for example, a friend of mine who's considering going back to school. And it's kind of funny because I was in that boat for some time, and her big concern is she doesn't want to take on all this student loan debt. It's the only way that she could really afford to go, but she doesn't want to take on all this student loan debt. Now, of course, she lives out in California, so I'm not really sure exactly how the whole student loan situation, I assume it's national and never really looked into it. But the fact remains here, her concern is she doesn't want to get saddled up with debt because she's essentially struggling already as it is. But she knows that going back to school will be the best way for her to better herself. My response to this is the same response that a friend of mine, Kevin, gave me when I worked at UK, and I thought about going to school part-time, and I told him I'm probably not going to do that, and he said, why? And I said, because it'll take me 12 years to graduate. And he looked me square in the eye and he said, let me tell you something, that 12 years is going to come and go, and at the end of that 12 years you can have a degree or you cannot have a degree. And that was his, and that changed me in so many ways, because I don't apply that to just school, I apply it to everything. This whole weight loss journey that I'm on, 5 years is going to come and go, 3 years, a year and a half, 2 years, however long it takes me to get to where I want to go. That time is going to come and go. And at the end of that time, I can have a much better body and I can be in much better shape, or I can be where I was before. I'm going to be a much better, have a much better body and be in much better shape. But that's what I invite you to accept. That's the philosophy I invite you to take on. It's terrifying. And this road that you walk, this tunnel you're walking down, it may be a tunnel that you walk down for years, for 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years. But either you can be stronger at the end of that 10 years for having endured that whole tunnel of shit, or you can still be where you are now, just as miserable as you are now. The choice is yours. But the fact remains, I kind of hope this is really, I guess, doesn't have a particular point per se. It's just something that I felt like I wanted to talk about, something that I felt like I wanted to get out there, because I feel like there's not a lot of videos like that. There are videos out there like that, but there's not a whole lot of videos like that. And I felt like this was something that kind of needed to be said. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.